Mike,
Steve.
how the heck are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Welcome, everybody, to the Pencil to Pencil podcast, Pencil to Pencil Live. As you might have noticed, we are down a man this evening as JAMAR Nicholas is on assignment, buried under a pile of deadlines.
Yeah.
And filling in is myself. My name is Steve Conley. I don't have a bucket hat, but I got the next best thing. You have
a. Is that an actual? Where did you get that hat?
I think in a Renaissance festival, like in Maryland back in the day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I think I would
perform feats of strength to get it.
No, I didn't.
You have to eat a big giant turkey wing.
I performed handing over my credit card. I'm sure
that was a feat of strength, right?
Yeah, ye old MasterCard. But I think I would be remiss, I believe is the phrase that JAMAR would use, if we didn't introduce, let's say, the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the magnificent, the marvelous Mike Manley.
Well, hello, the magnificent Steve Conley.
And again, my name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. And we get together every week, most weeks, usually with the trio of us, and we talk comics. This week we have something special. It's going to be talking about backgrounds in comics. This is a topic Mike brought up. And we all got excited the second he mentioned it. So folks who are looking for JAMAR, he will be back in about a month. He's on deadline working on the next Leon book.
Currently, pretty heavy deadlines to get the last of the art in for volume 2.
Right, and volume 1 is available where fine books are sold, and everyone should get a copy of it. It's in hardcover, it's in softcover, it's amazing. He's amazing.
You know, I saw it in various stages, but I have not actually seen the book yet.
Oh no!
Yeah,
I have an extra copy.
I haven't seen him. I was gonna try to see him about a month and a half ago, but we haven't. We see each other and we talk all the time, but so I saw it in stages while he was working on it, but I actually haven't seen the actual physical copy yet.
It's awesome. I recommend it to everybody. Tony DePaul says, my granddaughter loved volume 1. It's great. It's so great.
Everybody wants volume 2. See, that's why he's chained to the board tonight. You know?
But I hope he'll pop in. He gave us a little pep talk before we went live. I'm hoping at some point he'll pop in. Well, he needs to keep. I know he's got to be on deadline. I miss him already, but I think you just want to make sure we burn the place down. But so over the next 4 or 5 weeks, here's what I hope. I hope that we can get our YouTube subscribers. If you go to youtube.com/pencil TOpencil, we're a little over 900 subscribers now. I'd like to have us cresting 1,000 when he comes back. That's what I'm hoping.
More than 1,000. Show your love. Show your love.
We set achievable goals and we meet them. That's what we do. We don't
slowly, steadily, like the turtle winning the race, building every week. And it's amazing. I was just looking the other day how much content there is related to comics on YouTube. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. JAMAR 1000. We could use a 1,000 JAMARs. That would be awesome. Think how many volumes of Leon there would be.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, Mike, I want to ask you about this week. I also want to mention something. This is weird. I don't shop at Hobby Lobby, but I found out about this on Twitter. they're discontinuing Copic at Hobby Lobby. So this was $8.
Really?
This was $8. They're selling Copics for $2 a piece to get rid of them. So if you have a Hobby Lobby near you, again, I don't normally shop there, but $2 per Copic, and I drove out immediately this morning and found this set of 6 was $8.
Wow. Now, do they just selling the sets, or do they have all kinds of colors?
No, they have tons of. I went there.
That's why you were wearing that Robin Hood hat. You're in there like, ha, you know,
so
robbing the Hobby Lobby and giving to the cartoonists.
It's a Copics. Everybody loves Copics, and they're just $2 a piece. And as they're just getting rid of them, and they also had the Tombow brush sets.
Oh,
this was $3. So go in there, clean them out, make sure they find a good home, because Hobby Lobby, $8 for these each. So
because they're usually like a couple bucks a piece, right?
Yeah, usually the pricing on this was $37, and now it was $8. They're usually $8 a pen, and now they're down to $2. That
tells you what kind of markup that is.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's probably the price. They just have to cover their costs. Yeah.
And speaking of art supplies, so the big thing that went through Facebook this week was that Color Erase is discontinuing making their pencils. And I think except for sets, right, you'll be able to buy the sets. But, I mean, everybody from animators, every cartoonist I know uses the light blue and the red, yeah,
sure,
where is it, carmine red or whatever it is. Yes. And then so they've actually been through several manufacturers. Originally it was Sanford, and then they got bought by Prismacolor, and then they got bought by Kohinoor, and then whoever owns them, or I think Prismacolor might own them now. But it's like every couple of years they kept getting bought out, and that's one of the big things about art supplies in the last 20 years is that the amount of manufacturers has dwindled. That's why you can't get good ink anymore, because you can't get the Pelican ink the way it used to be from Germany. Part of it is the formula evidently had shellac in it. Shellac is considered to be some kind of a toxic substance. Now, you can go to your hardware store and buy shellac, but one of the reasons why that old ink laid down was so nice is that it actually had shellac in it. But, you know, they have all these laws about toxic chemicals and things being shipped.
Why can't it be poisonous?
Right, exactly. So everybody's been running around trying to buy up the remaining supply of Color Erase pencils. And I usually tend to stock up. I buy several dozen at a time. One of the things I learned a long time ago was that if you like something, buy a lot of it, because chances are any day one of those companies is going to go belly up. Like my favorite brushes, these old Kolinsky brushes, that company, Langnickel, doesn't exist anymore. And they made a fantastic brush. And no brush now is as good as those brushes were back then. And I don't know.
Pencil with it? Do you pencil with a Color Erase pencil? Is that
what you use? Yeah. Well, usually what I do is I pencil mostly with the red. I know Alberto Ruiz uses them. Mike Hawthorne pencils, does his rough drawing with the red. But the good news is I came across on Amazon I posted this on my Facebook page. They're called Zihan, I believe. they make red, blue, purple. So they make a bunch of different colored pencils. So I decided, well, I'll order a couple dozen. I used one today. You can see the drawing on my Facebook page. This is a light blue. So it's kind of similar to, it's somewhere between, not as light as a non-photo and not as dark as the indigo or the other blue that the Color Erase has. It's somewhere in there, but it seems to be pretty good. They were pretty cheap.
That's great.
The eraser works really well. And one of the main things was, if you used Prismacolor, regular Prismacolor pencils, they're too waxy. So when you erase the ink, a lot of it would come off.
Yeah, that stuff, it felt like you were laminating the page when you work with that.
Right. So this stuff
crayons
does not seem to have the wax in it. And I tried, erasing it and everything, and it seems pretty good. So I know a bunch of people today said that they were going to order. So this company is probably saying, like, hey, wait a minute, our sales went up 9,000% in like 3 or 4 days.
We need to include an affiliate link, Mike. We have a question. We have a question from YouTube from Tom Z. He's saying that the Raphael's no longer making the sable hair brushes. They're all artificial now. And ask a question about the pencils. What do you use the red ones for? He was always a blue guy. And
red ones for the same thing that I use the blue ones for. Because the other thing is that since I'm inking digitally now, I still pencil the pages, the phantom stuff. Doesn't matter if there's a little red on there, And you can also adjust your scanner to take the red out,
Right.
But the nice thing about the color erase pencils is that they erased. So even if you used a red or you used some people have used a green, they really easily erase. But I liked the red because the red read well against the pencil.
Sure.
The gray pencil. And
you put on your 3D glasses.
Right, yeah. So I ordered. So I got a box of those blue ones today or yesterday. And I have an order that may actually be in the door now of the red ones. So I'll do a drawing with that and also post that on my Facebook. But yeah, everybody used animators. All the animators I know, everybody used those color erase pencils. And it's like, you imagine there must be more people using them now because there's so many young cartoonists. I mean, there's like bushels of cartoonists compared to when I was coming along. But so I'm wondering why they're stopping. Are they stopping because there's not enough hobbyists? Are they stopping because there's the place in China like blew up or something? Why are they stopping to make them in the way that they did?
We got El Jamal. Hello, on YouTube says, I'm using the Ticonderoga blue pencils. I wish I had bought more of the Blackwing blue pencils. You ever use those, Mike?
No, I haven't. I know a lot of the animators like using the Blackwing pencils for drawing, especially on that nice animation paper. They really like that. And that's the thing. Every person finds that you have like your favorite paper, favorite pencil, favorite eraser, favorite ink, favorite brush, favorite marker. And one thing I will say, if you like it, literally buy hundreds of dollars worth of it if it's not going to go bad. Like pencils are never going to go bad.
Sure.
Brushes are never going to go bad. Ink might go bad.
Right.
Ink might go bad. Like I have actually, unfortunately, I still have some old Pelican ink that I bought in the 90s. But when I went to use it, it had turned into like a glob at the bottom of the bottle. So you had the liquidy water part, but the other part had separated. I don't know if I'd have to like boil it or something, to melt that block of goo.
Yeah, I've got a bottle of Pro White from the before time, probably from the last millennium. That's solid now, but I keep it as a totem. Yeah, I'm with you. It's really funny how so many people who work digitally have adopted drawing in blue. That's how when I'm drawing the Middle Age and I'm drawing digitally, I'm drawing in blue because it's just how my head works now. And I've seen Tom Zoller's digital work. He'll do red and blue. He mentioned it right there. Use red and blue when drawing digitally. So many of us are now, picking up these old techniques and applying them digitally.
Yeah. I mean, I think I still prefer. I mean, I do draw some of the strips right on the Cintiq. I still prefer to draw on paper. I just find it easier. Again, one of the things about drawing on paper is you see the whole thing, you feel the whole thing. Generally, when you're drawing on the tablet, because the tablet is smaller than a sheet of paper, everything is smaller. So to see it, you got to blow it up. So you're constantly doing this thing, right? You're going in, you're going out, going in, going out. And I just find that it takes longer. It takes longer to draw something.
You lose your sense of scale. You lose, like, where am I in this thing? And like sometimes I'll hold the iPad, I'll stand up and walk away from the iPad a little bit, but it still doesn't give you the same kind of, I don't know, it's harder to get your bearings.
Yes. And I think, at least in our case, because we learn to really draw and think and compose and everything before there was ever digital tablets, our brain is sort of wired in a different way, and one thing I notice about the students would be that they were constantly going in and out. It was harder to judge the whole piece because you're rarely seeing the whole piece. You're like, oh, I do this, and then I go back. Oh, okay, how does it look? Oh no, I don't like that. Or if they're making a stroke, which for me at this point is muscle memory, they do a stroke and I don't like it. Command Z. I do a Command Z. Command Z. Command Z. Command. They've done that stroke like 50 times sometimes. They get the one that they want. And so I think that there's advantages to digital, but there's, I think, also disadvantages to your development process with digital.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that to this day. It's interesting when you're working in ink, you can end up having a line you didn't expect, and that sometimes sends you in different directions. I think it gets you out of your comfort zone more often. Like when I'm drawing the hero from Middle Age, he's got a very road cone head. It's very conical. And if I get that line wrong, if it's in a traditional drawing, I have to deal with it. I have to live with it, and it sometimes sends me in directions that I didn't expect. And I'm like, oh wow, I like that. I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of my life, or at least until I stumble onto the next dumb thing. It's harder to stumble onto things, I think, if you're constantly undoing, and you're spending more time editing than writing.
I would say, just observing students working is that if it took you 4 hours to draw something, 90 minutes are Command Z.
Sure. Who wouldn't love undo? What traditional artist wouldn't love undo?
Right. Yeah. So it's also it's just a lot of adjustment. So a lot of times in the morning or in the evening, because if I was working all day, I'll just go back doing something traditionally. I actually feel like I'm suddenly loosening up because I feel like I was like in this box working all day.
I get that. I absolutely get that. We got a question from YouTube. Catalina Mello asks, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. You named before brushes which are not made anymore. What did you say they were called?
There was a Lang Nickel, LangNickle, LangGNICKLE. I believe they were a German company, and they made the Kolinsky. In fact, who turned me onto those brushes was Tom Palmer, the late Tom Palmer. He told me all about like why certain brushes were good and why certain brushes were bad, and I think we talked about it before, but evidently what makes a good brush is that the hair goes back into its shape. Like,
Sure.
if you use, you can get horsehair brushes, you can get a lot of other hog hair bristles they would make, things like that, right? But they don't make a real fine, delicate point, and they don't spring back into shape. And evidently, I remember Tom telling me this, the hairs around the anus of the Konskis always were the ones from the butt were the ones that they used, and so there was this place that made them, and I remember that when I was in Al's studio, Williamson's studio, he was ordering them, Tom Palmer was ordering them, Brett was ordering, Blevins was ordering them. We would order like a huge, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of brushes at one time. We'd group it together and get a big, huge, giant stack of brushes. And now I bought a Winsor Newton Series 7. God, it's awful now. They're expensive. They're very expensive, and they're just
no memory, no spring.
They just don't have a performance. There's a Rosemary Brushes who makes great brushes for oil painting and things like that. If a company like that can make them, I'm sure that they would probably be great. But so I end up using the Pentel water brush, and I'm using the sometimes I get the Dick Blick Studio series. I get a number 4. They're not as great as the old brushes, but you make do with what you have. I remember Al in the 80s complained about art supplies, and we would all now die and get a time machine and go back and buy all the art supplies that we could get
Absolutely
in the 80s. So there may be an alternative to the color erase going away.
And if folks have any, sorry,
go ahead. No.
Well, if anyone in chat wants to mention the brushes that they like to use, please put them in the comments, and we'll share them on the screen. So if you have any recommendations that you can share with everybody else, that'd be awesome. And also another vote here for original artwork. You can't sell digital. So yeah, it's a very good point. When I was working on the Star Trek series, I'd work digitally exclusively, and then when I was hired to do Star Trek for IDW, I immediately went to paper because I knew I wanted to have original artwork from that series. Faster way to get me off of digital than to incentivize me with cash.
Well, I know that I think Jeff Weigel was doing digital, and then he went back to doing traditional on the Phantom because he could sell the originals. And one of the reasons I went to digital, because I'd been sort of hovering, was that I have thousands and thousands of Judge Parker dailies. Huge stacks of Judge Parker dailies, and there really is no market for them. So at a certain point, it's like, well, if I go to digital, I still prefer traditional over digital. But, if it's faster, if it becomes a space issue, but I do the Phantom traditionally. At least I'm still penciling it traditionally. I would probably still be inking it traditionally, except the pandemic set up a thing to where now Liang, my assistant, she doesn't come over anymore. Everybody's working at home. Everybody was working remotely. So we still do that. Like tonight, if I have some stuff, send it over and she'll ink it up and send it back. So
that's great. EJB on YouTube. Currently, there are problems getting any kinds of Kolinsky sables in the U.S. due to trade restrictions.
Yeah. Thanks, Putin.
Mm-hmm. So now, now we're all going to enlist for Ukraine just to end this thing. Let's
That's
come
right.
on. Yeah. All the artists will we'll head over. And Tom on YouTube always inked his My Little Pony covers traditionally, but I did the pencils digitally. Yeah, I love the work. I love that way to work. I gotta imagine that helps with approval process and all that stuff.
Yeah, I find that inking digitally is faster. Because one of the things, if you like to use a pen, always have to sort of like ink a bunch, and then you got to put it away and let it dry, and then you ink on something else. So you might have 3 or 4 things going at one time, because you get a big bead of ink, and you got to let it dry, or you'll be smearing. So yeah, there's always some crisis as an artist, right? Like now, the other good news this week, or was it last week, is it looks like the AI guys might be getting taken down, or they might be forced to license or retrain their program. We'll see. It's been getting on, I think CBS had a thing on it. NBC had a thing on it. So it's sort of getting out there now into the public. And I think, the idea that they realize that, oh, we might get sued for this.
Yeah, and I saw there was a story. I didn't get to read too much about it. It appeared as though a comic book that was, or maybe a graphic novel, which had been, which had gotten a copyright, and it was AI artwork, apparently was denied a copyright or had the copyright revoked. So there's I mean, as long as it's going to be AI created by AI, it was really funny. I'm very involved in the tabletop role-playing game artwork community and creative community, and there's a very strong group of people who are specifically, they're not artists. They're coming at this from the point of view of writers, and they love the AI ability, the ability of that software to produce artwork, and they don't, because they have no budgets, right? So, and the ethics of it goes right over their head. They're just thinking, I can press a few buttons and get something pretty. It's something that it's not something that everybody else in the world already has, because the stock houses have been picked clean by these folks in all their different books. But they're huge advocates for that technology. It's fascinating, the idea that one person actually said, just go in and if you see AI art anywhere else, just take it, because since it can't be copywritten, all those advantages of you having your own unique thing, and since you can't protect it, since it's stolen to begin with, well, just put it in your own book.
So everybody you'll just have these band of people incestuously, constantly re-stealing, and then stealing it again, and then stealing it again. Yeah. And then you have 7 fingers, and then you have 14 fingers, and then you have 36 fingers.
Yeah, I don't need an AI. I can draw hands badly without any help. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because it cannot draw hands. It's getting better at faces, but it cannot draw hands.
But it's great with monsters and things like that. So it's really good for the fantasy game, the fantasy, world, and concept design and things like that.
Everything looks like a nightmare. It has like too many teeth, and
Yeah, it's what Ollivander said about Harry, about you should not be named. Terrible, yes, but great. It's terrible, but it's it's powerful and bad. So speaking of not naming it anymore, let's talk about tonight's topic. You kicked this one off, Mike. You suggested this. I love this idea, because it's talking about wonderful backgrounds, and your comics have those. The Phantom, and every comic you do always seems to have the right balance. So let's talk about it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I thought it was, and in fact, one of the things that when I would teach a class, we would really talk about, world building, and just the overall craftsmanship of your draftsmanship, to create a fantasy world, whether it's a cartoony one or more realistic. One of the most important aspects of convincing the reader of the world you're creating is not just the characters, but also the environments. And often in the beginning, it seemed like artists would sort of fall into sort of two categories. People who like to draw backgrounds and people who kind of like had to draw backgrounds, right? People who would leave all their backgrounds until the end. And then, that was a fatal mistake. Go through, draw the fun stuff, draw your characters, draw this stuff. Oh, there'll be something over there. There'll be, and then you got to go back and draw all of your, lamps and doors and cars and, or whatever. And the artists I admired, whether they were realistic or stylistic or cartoony, they all did great backgrounds and environments. And some of them, like Kirby or Jack Kirby or Mobius, were just like kings of world building. And you probably couldn't find two artists who were in some respects so opposed to each other, right, stylistically, but yet one of the things that they have in common is that their vision is complete, from like the eyelash to the doorknob. There's a door there, there's a Jack Kirby doorknob and there's a Mobius doorknob.
Sure.
Right. And that is, you really reached a level of creativity where you can like warp or so have such a complete vision that you can do that. Right. So I thought a good thing would also be to talk about how a lot of the basics of design, storytelling, are the same with different artists, but the result stylistically may be very different. And often you don't think, oh, I like this, that's real, or that's horror, or people tend to categorize and not necessarily see the similarities between artists and how they use things like negative space, how they use texture, how they use line, how they use perspective.
Right.
So I thought this would be a very good subject. I posted on my Facebook. I also posted on my Instagram. I'll show it here again tonight. When I had my two assistants were here working, I made this little handout because they were working on their comics and they were working on backgrounds that sort of covered some of the design aspects of background or landscape design. So we'll talk about that tonight. So
that's fantastic. And you put together some samples, and we can bring them up. Just you give the word, and I'll.
Okay. Let me do this here.
And please, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell, please do. Again, we want to get to 1,000 subscribers before Jamar gets back. And if you're on the Facebook, hello, and please click the like button, the heart button, any button. Just start clicking randomly.
Okay.
And,
I think.
And if you're busy, just put us on. Just mute us and put us on in the background, just so we have good numbers. You got a list.
I think I have my list up. My first.
Fantastic. Here we go.
Okay. And so to start out with, one of the things I always would talk about is that the backgrounds are contributing so much to the believability, the richness of your narrative and story, and they really are essential to building the world that your characters live in. And one of the things I'm going to show tonight is how, whether you're doing like a gag cartoon or you're doing something cartoony or something much more realistic, all these principles that I'm talking about here apply. And sometimes it's like I said before, it's really interesting to see how two different artists like Al Williamson or Hank Ketchum might actually be using the same process or technique, but their work looks stylistically very different.
That's wonderful. Would you later on? Would you be able to share this list on your Instagram? I don't know
Sure,
if that's going to mess up your metrics, but it'd be great if folks can see this elsewhere as well.
Right. So, and a lot of the stuff is stuff that I came to thinking about this myself and comparing artists. And why do I like this artist? And oh, I noticed that this artist is kind of doing the same thing as another artist, because I taught myself how to do comics. I didn't take a college course. I didn't have any teachers on how to do comics, so I'm a sort of an autodidact in that way. I had to sort of teach myself, and I did that through studying and comparing one artist to another. And I recommend that all cartoonists, all artists do that. Have a notebook, have a file, and really spend time thinking about, well, why do I like this? Or why do I think something here is similar to something over there? And like Picasso would say, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Steal that idea, take that idea, analyze it, break it down, figure out why you like it and how you can apply it. So I sort of look at backgrounds as being either quote unquote realistic or abstract, right? And there is a spread of styles within each description, right?
Bob on YouTube was saying that the backgrounds in the Roadrunner cartoons, loving those. Yeah.
So that was something. There's a good thing that Bob brought that up. That was something that I was very impacted by as a kid, were those Chuck Jones cartoons that were designed by Maurice Noble. And then there were certain backgrounds that were painted by like people like Holly Pratt or Philip DeGard. And I would pay attention to the end of the credits as I got older, into my teens. And so I realized, like, well, I always liked Chuck Jones, but then I realized, well, why did I like Chuck Jones? Oh, there's this other guy, Maurice Noble, who designed all those backgrounds, right? But again, since I was old enough to remember watching cartoons, those cartoons had such an impact on my brain, right? They're like my primal, probably my primal influence as far as art and design are those Chuck Jones cartoons when I really think about it. And it's specifically the ones, that had those great designs by Maurice Noble. And the other thing is that learn perspective. Right? Learn the traditional perspective, your 1, 2, and 3 point perspective. You can look it up. It's on the web. Somebody asked Mobius, what are the 10 things that Mobius recommends? Learn perspective. Because once you learn it, it's a tool. It becomes an expressive tool. And then you're able to use it, bend it, twist it. And it's one thing to have that ability, because it frees you. It gives you more options as an artist. And I would say the younger you are and the earlier you can learn perspective, the faster you will advance. Because a lot of the students I would teach third, even fourth year in college, who were really weak on perspective, which was most students, were really hampered because they wanted to do better, more advanced. They want to do like really cool stuff, but they're struggling because their perspective is weak. And it's always hard to go back and try to re-engineer that stuff.
For someone who wanted to learn perspective, is there a single reference, like maybe if someone finds a famous artist book out there, or is there a?
Well, the best book, the book I learned my basic perspective from was Fun with a Pencil by Andrew Loomis. And Andrew Loomis did several books, but so I learned that. I was probably like, my grandfather gave that to me when I was like 10 or 11. And I could understand the 1 point, the railroad track perspective. And then when he started getting to the 2 point and all that with the multiple, I by the time I was like 15, 16, I understood that. When I was a little bit younger, it was kind of hard to figure out what all those lines and all that stuff meant.
Sure.
But the single best book I still recommend to everybody is Successful Drawing by Andrew Loomis, because he shows you how to do every type of perspective in there. He shows you how to extrude a floor plan. He shows you how to draw down shots, up shots, moving figures, complicated grouping of figures. Just a fantastic book. In fact, I just recommended that book to someone who was designing coins for the U.S. Treasury, because they were designing I guess a seal or a coin that had it was a Vietnam a war memorial of a wall curving in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed them how they had a photograph. Of course, if you take a photograph with your iPhone, it distorts sort of wide angles things. So I showed them how you can take that distortion out, and then how you can, there was a bunch of stars along the wall. That was the problem. So if you draw the stars along the wall here in one section, and then you draw the guidelines out, you could basically copy and repeat. Right?
What was
that stuff.
What was the name of that book again, Mike?
Successful Drawing by Andrew Loomis. It is $32, I believe, on Amazon. You can probably find cheaper copies. You can probably even find free copies, because there used to be a saveloomis.org website. So there are free PDFs of all the Loomis books floating around. And for years, before they were ever back in print, because they only came back in print about maybe 10 years ago, maybe less than 10 years ago. I took me years myself to find the books, but there were free copies on the internet, which are still floating out there. So, and then I break perspective down again, or backgrounds down again, into lyrical, like organic, like trees, landscapes, plants, water, right? Those are organic, right? Mechanical, like buildings, any kind of machine. Pattern, texture, line weight, and then the last thing is how you light your scene. Now, you may not have a style that has a heavy lighting on it, right? It may be something like Garfield, or a very cartoony style, a manga, an anime style even, that doesn't have any. So you're dealing with line weight, not necessarily lighting scenes. And then nobody uses these things exactly the same, but they use this list of principles, sort of like the canon of what you use.
I noticed you had, I noticed you had symmetrical on the list. You didn't talk about that. Was that is that
Oh,
is that
right,
our
right. So
is that our
symmetrical,
Wes
like,
Anderson? Was that our
yes, or let's say, like, often if you're in a church, or there's like a stadium, there's a lot of settings where things are going to be symmetrical, or you
right.
may do a symmetrical composition or background, which might, like Frazetta would do the pyramid composition, a lot of pyramid compositions, which are very powerful. But let's say you wanted to draw a king at the top of the steps with his throne. That's probably, you could do a very symmetrical straight on, and that's very powerful because it's very calming, right? So symmetrical, then you have asymmetrical, right? These are just sort of design principles, right? You may use one, you may not use any on that particular background, but these are just things to sort of keep in mind. I'll show my other screen here.
And I got a question here, Mike.
Yeah.
Scott on YouTube, mostly joking, I think, but also being very, very self-deprecating, says, "What if your brain is too stupid to understand how perspective works? Asking for a friend that's not me." Are there shortcuts? Are there tips for people who find perspective challenging, or if someone's really having a tough time picking up perspective? Are there tips that you can recommend? I mean, you said start younger, so let's say that option is no longer available to me.
Well, I would say that, I mean, this is something I hear all the time. It's too hard or whatever, but really, anyone, if you took 6 weeks, you can learn perspective. If you really applied yourself for 6 weeks, you could learn perspective. You could learn
So
one,
it's intimidating, but it's not complicated.
It's I think people are intimidated by it because they look at and they see all these lines, and this looks like math, and it looks like it's this really complicated thing, but actually you have a horizon, and you have 1, 2, or 3 vanishing points. 2 vanishing points on a horizon, or 1 vanishing point above or below the horizon. And once you have the vanishing point, you can draft out your lines, easy cheesy. The thing is you have to do those exercises until it pops off in your brain. It would be just like any other thing. Like, you want to draw hands, or you want to draw animals, or you want to draw, Wolverine's forearms with all the muscles and the veins, right? You have to apply yourself to anything, or so I don't think that it's as complicated as people think it is, or as hard, because, again, like, I learned it as a teenager, and I'm not some, wunderkind. I was not particularly super talented. I don't think I'm super talented now. I think I'm just very determined and focused. I think, what was it? I read a quote the other day from Stephen King, who said, talent is like as common as table salt, or something like that. It's basically, it's application. It's application. I am application. My success all comes from application, not from, I don't believe, from talent. I believe, not that I had no ability or whatever, but what I really had was monstrous application. So I think if you really want to learn, because when I would teach it, I could get students who were weak at perspective, in the course of one semester, they could learn it. Now, whether you really want to continue to apply yourself, again, that's like a personal desire. You know, I knew that if I wanted to be anywhere near as good as my heroes, they all knew it. Every single person knew perspective, right? So there was like, if I want to be like Neil Adams or Kirby or Buscema or Mobius, or, you know, just go down the list, they all knew it. So how could I not know it? You know?
Well, I'll bring up these other images of yours, but you really should save Monstrous Application as the name of your next sketchbook.
Well, you know, I really think that is the key to everybody I know who's successful. They have that monstrous ability to apply themselves. And that's what really separates, I think, people who become successful, is they're willing to do that. And they love doing it. It's not like, oh, like every day I'm having to eat my green peas, or it's just this horrible, terrible thing, you know? So now this is also on my Instagram and on my Facebook in the last week. So what I did was I made this little mini lesson, and I stuck it above Mimi, and the tables right behind me where Mimi and Liang would work, to just talk about basic ideas of shape design. And, you know, you're using all the sort of basic shapes. You're learning how to overlap shapes, right? Overlapping basic shapes creates a composition, right? Now you can do this in a very flat style, which I call a design style. So if you look at something like those Chuck Jones cartoons, or you look at something like Dexter's Lab, or you look at a Samurai Jack, they are not linear perspective, right? They're designed perspective, where something is closer and it's bigger. Or, you know, you don't see you never see like a down shot. Things tend to be layered, right? So it's about design. So you can do perspective as design. So the gentleman that was just asking that question, he might prefer doing that, the more designed perspective, as opposed to doing the linear, you know, with the vanishing points and all that. You can design perspective. You see that all the time in cartoons. You see that all the time in cartoons, where it sort of comes out of modern art, right? And there's certain tricks you do, like putting big shapes in front of other shapes to create. There's no perspective there, but it looks like there's perspective there because of the way the shapes are aligned. Okay. But the other thing is that where you put your vanishing point affects your composition. Right. And so you really cannot separate these things. They're all connected. Everything when you're drawing is connected. The figures are connected to the backgrounds. They're in the backgrounds. You know, the backgrounds contribute to the story. They contribute to the atmosphere. All this stuff is connected. And I think what happens is sometimes when we're learning things, we tend to separate things and not realize that they're joined. Part of it is the art education system too tends to be very sort of compartmentalized, and there's not always a good flow of how one subject relates to another subject. There sort of is a disconnect, you know. And sometimes when you're really learning one thing, you kind of drop something else because you're like overcompensating. So this is up on my Instagram, and it's on my my Facebook page.
And what's your Instagram? What's your Instagram?
Draw Manley is my Instagram.
All right.
And it's Mike Manley on Facebook. And so I would make little mini lesson primer for them. I have another one on there that just deals with compositions. And those are the kind of things that people often don't think about, because they kind of get lost in the bigness of things, and things get separated. And so to get into the meat of tonight's, we'll do this first. So
You want me to share that?
yeah, you can share that. So this is the book, Successful Drawing by Andrew Loomis. It is such a great book. And it should just be like right there on your little drawing desk, you know, wherever you are. And again, irrespective of style, traditional, digital. I know a lot of people like to use the perspective tools and things like that, but my feeling really is you learn perspective the old-fashioned way, because you will understand it and you will feel it better. When you let the machine do it, you're not thinking about it. The machine, you know, puts the lines out.
Yeah.
Right? Now, when I sit down and I put a vanishing point and I grid out, I'm actually feeling that space. In my head, I'm feeling that space. Right? One of the again, we talked about this earlier. One of the things about the digital stuff is that there's so many automatic things that you don't even really think about. You know, just left, right, this, that. I don't think I would have the feeling of perspective, which is important in how I approach building my scenes, building my panels, building my frames, feeling the characters in the environment. I am convinced that I would not feel that if I did not learn it the way that I did. If I learned it, you know, just like, okay, I'm gonna go to Clip Studio. I'm gonna one point I'm just gonna kind of turn it around, and you know, you can do with the things, you can even put the little figures in. All right, that's kind of like to me, that's like color forms, you know, where you're just sort of sticking things in, but I'm not feeling it. I'm kind of go like, do I like that? You know, it's like, I don't know. If I use it now, I use it in a different way, and I have all that other years of practice that informs the choices that I make digitally.
Sure.
Right. And so, because I have students who use the perspective tool. In fact, I had my assistants would use the perspective tool in some of their assignments or some of their own drawings. And there were things that were still off. Because if you don't really know it, you'll think, oh, I used the perspective tool and it gave me the vanishing point, and now I'm putting a figure in there, but then it's like,
yeah, now the figure's 8 feet tall or 2 feet tall. It's all, yeah, because placing the figure in is a whole other task, right?
Right. So one of the things, we'll just skip right to the meat. So is this showing now?
Not yet. I think we're still seeing the Loomis book.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second.
Oh,
They
and some
changed
comments.
everything. They changed everything.
Oh, and regarding they did update the software. Hierarchical composition was Bob Lilly's
Oh, okay.
take on it.
So that should share now. Do you see that?
I do. Adding it
Okay.
now. There we go.
Okay. So again, I'm always saying that the backgrounds are as important as characters. And to me, the greatest example for us comic folks is probably Gotham City, right? So here's a shot from year one. Here's a shot from Dark Knight. So notice how they're very sort of similar in their use. 1 point. Also, here's a little trick in the 1 point. Now, when you do a 1 point, it can sort of feel like things are being pinched. One of the ways to avoid that is to hide the vanishing point. So both David Mazzucchelli and Frank Miller hide the vanishing point. So you see the convergence towards the vanishing point, but you don't see it. So it doesn't feel as artificial, because one of the things when people start doing backgrounds in the beginning, they like, well, I drew the 1 point. And like, oh, I don't like the way it feels. I don't like it feels claustrophobic or whatever. And a lot of times when people start designing backgrounds, they don't feel lived in. They feel very sort of artificial.
Yeah.
So both artists do that trick of hiding the vanishing point.
That panel looks like they cheated the perspective quite a bit, but it still works.
Well, again, if you know the rule, you know how to cheat. Now, usually another cheat is if you hang all the people's waists at about the same, right? You'll see, again, that's in that Loomis book. It kind of makes everybody, so even if you get further away, if you keep putting their waist on the horizon line, even though everybody's a little bit taller, a little bit shorter. So here, he sort of makes Bruce Wayne, he cheats it a little bit, and it makes Bruce Wayne bigger.
Yeah,
Also,
that panel,
this big solid black, right?
It's so Eisner.
You know, so, and then this nice little bit of movement, you know, little movement through here. And again, you will see a little thing of smoke. You'll see this in other artists using the same thing. And then, of course, I think this is a much more current Gotham City. So Gotham City is like this now, but that's how it started. you know, in the 60s, here's, this sort of weird, bizarre, oh, okay. It's like not even a character. It's like sort of an afterthought,
Yeah. Like we talked about before, if that was your Gotham City now, you'd be doing it wrong.
Right. So it's like, again, these are by Carmen Infantino, who always did this really bizarre slanting perspective. So again, Gotham City, could it be Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Boise, Idaho, any any sort of generic city, it's not certainly nothing like this, dark, foreboding, and I think, they were coming from, Neil Adams, who was much more realistic, who came after this, right? And then you go through Frank Miller, who goes back to sort of the noirish film noir, to the films, and Anton Furst, who did all those great, amazing Gotham City backgrounds. So it's this conglomerate of a bunch of people's visions to create this fictional city like a puzzle with each artist putting in a piece, right? Some people put in big pieces, right? But this shows you how, you know, Gotham City, you know, and when I was a kid, you know, you were always watching that. I loved the Batman TV show, and it was Gotham City. You know, they constantly were saying in Gotham City. But you can see it's just like, just really, the city was not as much of a character.
Yeah, it didn't have a personality.
Now, right. Now the city is a character, right? Now it's a character. Much like the Phantom and the Skull Cave, which came before Batman, right? So even from the beginning, even though the early Phantom artists drew in a much more cartoony style, you know, this iconic throne, you know, the skull throne, you know, with those two braziers who, you know, were lighting the, you know, that this, for comic strips, that was probably the most iconic setting before Batman came along. You know, Batman got a lot of stuff from, you know, the Phantom. And another thing, I think one of the reasons why, now these comics are probably not that far apart in time. But one of the things I think that you could see that made Marvel jump out at people was that, look at this dynamic use of perspective by Romita, right? You're in the city, you know, the New York of Marvel Comics is much more exciting than the Gotham City, right? And this dynamic use and sort of slightly warped use of, right? I mean, look at that, kind of like the way Jinx down there, you know, but he knows perspective so well that he's able to bend it and make it much more dramatic, sort of this sort of wide angle to really push you, this figure going in, I mean, away from you. It's very dynamic, right? And I think one of the reasons why Marvel stuff really started popping with people is because that dynamic use of perspective in the backgrounds, especially with Spider-Man, you know, being on the building, being up,
right,
you know, and it's sort of easy to forget now because it's all been baked in. It's all been baked in for such a long time. You don't really think, oh, at one time, this, you know, was the idea. You know, you're looking up. You know, you still see a lot of looking up at characters now, but another great perspective shot by Romita.
Yeah, love that one.
You know, on top of the fact, you know, you have all these verticals that are actually pointing right at the characters, and because they're very vertical and the characters are very organic, they really read against each other.
Yeah.
Right.
It's strong diagonal. It's excellent.
Yep. And I mean, sort of the same thing, right? You see the same ideas. Now, we go to something completely different. Here's a Charles Adams cartoon. So this is a spot illustration, you know, just one illustration. But look how masterful his use of perspective is here and his composition. And he doesn't even have any of the principal Addams Family characters in this illustration. But this tells you everything that you need to know about the characters, even though none of them are in it, right? So again, here's a prime example of how important the environment or the background is in developing that world, giving you the feeling of that world. It actually stands in for the characters.
It's beautiful.
And again, another great use of perspective, you know, kind of warpy, kind of off, very personal, the weird chandelier, you know, there's a little bit of smoke, adds a little bit of movement to that composition. Another example of that environment is as important as any of those characters. In fact, there's more environment space-wise than characters, right? The same way in this one up here. I mean, you've got two little figures, so it's mostly environment. So it's really important for that environment to be arranged, designed, composed well. And then I pulled up a bunch of great Calvin and Hobbes Sundays or dailies here with the snow scene and just the beautiful use of negative space. And one of the things that I go back and talking about those Maurice Noble designs had the same thing. A lot of brilliant use of negative space. And when I was younger, I didn't think of negative space as much. I thought about positive things, objects, right? You're thinking about, I'm going to draw this laboratory. I'm going to draw this thing, whatever, Kirby machine or whatever. When you don't realize it, sometimes this use of negative space is just as powerful, if not more powerful, depending upon the context, as the positive space.
But just enough environment to make it work. Like those trees help so much.
Well, also, if you put trees down here, it would stop it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Right? They're flying, right? If you put a tree here, it would stop it. So you feel them. And then just look at the beautiful intervals of these trees. No shape is the same. Right? No tree is the same width. No tree is at the same angle.
Yeah.
Right.
And none of them perfectly, no right angles. That would confuse it with the panel border.
Right. And one of the things about doing so this is organic, right? This is mechanical.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Now, one of the things he does to help break that up is to Dutch that chair, to angle that chair. So you have this, but that going in pulls you in.
That's the first thing I saw when that panel is like, okay, there's perspective going on. You can see it with the planks of wood. You can see it with the guillotine and the noose, the gallows. With that chair just being at a different angle, it's like, oh, my head's breaking because of the perspective challenge of having anything else not following the same grid.
So another beautiful use of negative space. Very daring in today's sense. And also the placement of the word balloons. I mean, with comics, you have to take into account that you always have to include the balloon as part of the composition of the panel. And again, just magnificent use. Nice. Again, this is one of the 101, one of the basic compositional ideas is to frame something. And we'll see a lot of frames, right? So this is a nice frame. This is a frame within a frame. Even more, I think this is the last Calvin and Hobbes. But look at that. You feel the snow here. You feel the cold and you feel the snow. And you don't see anything. I mean, you only see it like on the tree. The drop shadows of the trees. But again, look at the beautiful intervals of design. You really, again, this is flat. But because of the way he angles that, you feel that there's a perspective, though you see no ground plane. And then I brought this up. Now, this is one of my favorite comics from when I was a kid. I just love this comic. And I think Russ Heath is doing basically the same thing as Bill Watterson is. He's not drawing the snow, right? Just a little bit here, just a few little things here to indicate that this is in front of that. So you see the perspective of the bullet hits, right? But look at that, how you feel the snow. And I remember getting this comic on a vacation to Canada, to Ipperwash Beach, and they had a little store, like a general store, and buying this comic, and that sense of what he did with the snow just blowing me away as a kid. I just kept looking at this over and over and over and over. So you see the same, different style, different whimsical subject matter, hard-bitten World War II, fighting Nazis in the snow. Same ideas. Same ideas. Another great artist is Hank Ketchum, did Dennis the Menace. Beautiful sense of design. Again, look at how beautifully that tree is designed. But also look at what is not drawn. He does not very often complete things. He does not complete that tree. He doesn't touch things. He very often leaves room, or what I call like a sparkle. Like even Dennis's head does not connect. Like Dennis doesn't have a neck. He never draws Dennis's neck. And then look how you read that tree. I mean, those steps, how beautifully. And he sort of, again, just like that Charles Adams, he dutches it in, so he pulls you in, so it's not flat, even though it is essentially flat. It's not flat because he knows how to use enough perspective to make those shapes dynamic.
It's excellent.
And
I also love using the background, like the shape of the stairs to outline the cat. Excellent. In panel one. Excellent.
Yes. Right. So not only do you outline the cat, you also see Margaret's face. You helps her silhouette read, right? Again, silhouette there. So this is a positive on a negative, and negative on a positive.
Excellent.
And just how beautiful those little shapes are.
Yeah.
Right? All those little intervals of that tree. Now, here's a guy you can tell looked at trees. He paid attention to that. You know, he didn't draw like the stick with the stuff that looks like broccoli, right? He really made each one of these trees really interesting and beautiful. Even all these lines are not the same. They do not all end at the same point. So that adds interest. Just enough ground, a little bit closer together, those little dots, grass. moves you in perspective, even though there is no perspective, right? So again, that's a designed, this is an example of designed perspective, right? This is an example of like a much more realistic perspective. I mean, the perspective of the figures, the perspective on the hand, the low angle perspective of the guy holding the gun. There's a lot of like real perspective on this, pushed. I mean, look how beautiful that figure is tumbling. A lot of real perspective. This is designed perspective. Same thing here. Also, what you notice is that he Dutched both of those. He angled those slightly. So it's not a frame within a frame, not a box within a box. By angling these things, even though, again, these are essentially flat, everybody's flat. You could like silhouette in each person and read their pose. And then look how beautiful. There's not one more thing than you need. Just doing those lines in the bottom of that box gives it form. So it's not flat. Just here.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's just so interesting. He's also, in both of those examples, he's messing around with the camera angles. Usually there's like a 180-degree rule with the positioning of the camera and the people. Someone who's on the left stays on the left. Someone who's on the right stays on the right to keep the reader oriented. In both of these cases, he's swung the camera completely around. And it's almost a little disorienting at first. It's really interesting.
But I remember one day, because I always liked his work, realizing that he never drew Dennis's neck. So, but again, look at simplest idea of perspective, of shape, of volume. You really couldn't get just those few little lines give you volume.
And the energy in Dennis's pose in the second panel, the tilt of the head in panel 1 is so great. Just so great.
Again, he's doing that going in. And then also what I call casual drafting, which is that's drawn by hand, not with a ruler, right? None of these lines are drawn by a ruler.
Yeah, it would feel weird if they were.
Right. But you don't notice it until I just said it. You don't really think about it.
It would feel out of place.
Right. So also texture, pattern and texture. So how that pattern, that pattern, that pattern, that pattern, right? So you've got that.
If there weren't those little dots on the horizontal surfaces, I think those areas would fall apart. They'd almost be like an Escher drawing. Like they would cease to be things that you could stand on.
These are what I call activation dots. That's what I would call activation dots, which is if these dots, these little dots, the way they're used and placed, activate that space, right? And give you the sense, because we know in our mind, we think things that are closer to us are bigger, and things that go away from us become smaller and closer together, right? So that's like using the trick of the visual clue that we know that, this looks closer to us, but really if you just erased all that, you would just see a bunch of dots. But yeah, a lot of activation.
There's a fun comment on YouTube from a JAMAR who says, "Did someone mention Hank Ketchum?"
Yeah. Now here is another example, another great example. So you've got beautiful tree, beautiful shapes, different kind of line, different kind of pattern, another form of texture, right? All drawn by hand, beautifully composed, beautiful place of blacks. You don't need one more thing, and if you take one thing out, it falls apart. And look at where he stops the line. Look, he doesn't connect.
Yeah.
It's always leaving all these little sparkles, right?
It's like if they touch, they'd somehow be put onto the same plane. By keeping a little distance, they're just separated a little bit more.
Well, you see the same thing when you look at Alex Raymond. Again, I could have been on here for 20 hours showing all these things. But you go and you look at Alex Raymond, specifically you look at his Rip Kirby stuff, and you will see him do stuff like not draw lines on a character, not draw the back of Rip Kirby's neck, but draw the shirt. Will not connect. He would leave just enough room between all this stuff without touching that it adds a little bit of air into that. A little bit of air, and it just gives it such a sparkle, such an energy. And again, that tree would be flat, except you add a couple activation dots. So there's lots of little activation dots like this. Little activation dots.
Yeah, excellent.
And then I talked about them before. So this is Mobius or Jean Giraud. This is his Lieutenant Blueberry work that he did. He was probably most famous for just amazing backgrounds, amazing texture, so amazingly convincing and interesting, and so influential to generations of artists. In fact, one of the interesting thing about people like Mobius or Frank Robbins or Kirby or people like that is they constantly keep getting rediscovered. Every 10 years, there's like a whole new wave of people who go, "Hey, that Mobius guy is amazing."
You ever see this guy? You ever see this guy, Mike?
Just amazing draftsmanship. I mean, just all these beautiful shapes. And again, just like Hank Ketchum, just everything is just right. That cross-hatching, describing the planes. He was so fantastic at that.
Those colors, that gradient, that shadow that gradiates from like a burgundy to a deep purple in panel 2, and it's gorgeous. Oh, so much to love about that. I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to.
No. And here's a little bit later Blueberry, which starts going more towards his science fiction style. So I think the Blueberry stuff was more of a brush style. And then Blueberry became, or the Mobius stuff, which was sort of his pen name, became more of a pen style. Yeah. But again, look at all those activation dots.
Yeah.
Right? All those little activation dots beautifully describing the background. There are the artists that I'm showing you today on this, there are no lazy shapes. There's not something that they just threw down and go, fill in space, just fill in space, right?
Wouldn't have this would have been better with all motion lines in the background, right? Like,
and then you notice, look, there's that little cowboy following him.
That's great.
Right. And then here's this full blown, Mobius heavy metal style with an amazing pen and ink technique, and just, there was nobody else like him. Nobody else like him. You can see a lot of Crumb and Virgil Finlay and a lot of other, great pen and ink artists were obviously big influences on him. Jack Davis, but just amazing environments, background, world building, and another fantastic Blueberry background.
And not a lot of people talk about that, Mike. How making these backgrounds really is literally world building, and how it is just so important that it just doesn't feel real until the background just has to feel legitimate. It has to feel authentic. It has to feel connected. Otherwise, we're looking at those early Batman stories where it's just this is a good story taking place in a generic city.
Right. I mean, yeah, if we just go back to that image, right? I mean, at the time, this was really exciting to people, but you sort of feel like this doesn't transfer through time in a way because of the sort of just strange stylizations, where I think certain styles are much more timeless. I think that's kind of timeless, right?
Yeah.
I think this is timeless. I think styles that are more design based can be a little bit more timeless than styles who are a little bit more heavily rendered, depending upon the subject matter. And that, again, just an amazing shot and use of perspective.
Yeah.
Fantastic use. If you don't know perspective, you cannot do anything like that. I mean, that's Blade Runner right there.
Yeah, and Fifth Element, and
right. And he was
and
definitely
was it Coruscant? Is that the planet in Star Wars?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he was a main influence on things like Blade Runner.
Yeah, beautiful.
So here's a very early Charlie Brown by Charles Schulz. And what do you see? Perspective. There's Snoopy in his doghouse. We see perspective and a few trees. And I know this stuff was very influential on Bill Watterson, because you kind of feel it.
Yeah.
You kind of feel it. Now here's a later Peanuts. Right? Now it's starting to get a little bit flatter, but you still have a little, look at that perspective there.
Yeah.
And you see Snoopy. Very simple design, but everything contributes. Everything contributes. I mean, look at those beautiful trees.
Yeah, those are lovely.
Right? You don't think of, Charles Schulz is the guy who drew beautiful trees. Right? You don't think about that, right? You think of he drew kids with brown heads.
And it's just enough to say this is a neighborhood. It's just enough in the panel one, and then the rest of it can just be those squiggly tree lines. And
then this is probably, you would say, this is the mature style, the style that everyone, if you think of Peanuts, you don't think of this, and you don't think of this, you think of this. And now look how Snoopy's doghouse is completely flat. And look at, he's eliminated the backgrounds. His work became much more minimalist as he went along. Look at this version of Linus. Right.
So is that could it be said that like if a comic has established its environment, established its world, that maybe it becomes less necessary later on to do it, or is it if the in the case of a gag strip like this, that the background wasn't key to the gag, so why is there a minimalist argument happening at the in that last uh Charles Schultz in that last Peanuts episode we're looking at there?
You know, I think in the case of someone like Schultz, he just kept refining it and refining it and refining it so that his world was, he drew it for like 40 years or some, 47 years or some crazy amount of time like that. So that anybody who knew these characters accepted those characters and accepted that. I mean, look at that version of Snoopy compared to this version. I mean, all these characters have perspective and volume in the way that none of these characters have perspective and volume.
Yeah, they're icons at this point. They're just they're symbols.
Right. I mean, maybe a little there. Right. Maybe a little there. That's about the only shot where you get a little bit of perspective. And he like cheats the leg. Right.
Yeah.
But again, this is beautiful, and you really feel the volumes of those. You feel the volume of this doghouse. The simplest amount of line, a little bit of rendering.
I've loved this conversation, Mike. This is oh my goodness, who is this?
So now this is Otomo, the guy who did Akira.
Right.
So now perspective up the wazoo. And all the motion lines and all the detail and all the little bits of dirt lines and everything to help indicate the ruined city. I mean, just like a cyberpunk level of detail.
Yeah. Wow.
Same thing here, just, and I would say he's probably at this stage, he and Mobius are sort of contemporaries. And I think they kind of influenced each other a little bit. But just an amazing backgrounds, amazing draftsmanship. So if you want to do something like this, as convincing as this, there's no way not to use perspective.
Right. Tom asks, how do you keep those straight ruled lines from going dead? That's exactly what I was wondering.
There's two ways to do it. Now, some guys would use a brush. We can come back to that. Let's go through. Here's another great background by this. Frank Robbins. This is from a issue of The Shadow. Amazing texture, perspective. It's got it all. Framing, foreground framing, background framing. Just an amazing use of line and texture. Here's another great example. There is to me, with guys like this, there's no bad Johnny Hazard. There are no bad Johnny Hazard strips. They are all just, amazing to me. Look at all that.
That's great.
Texture, but texture that also informs the narrative, texture or detail or pattern. And again, he also does that thing where nothing is straight. Everything is at a slight angle. Nothing is straight. Everything is slightly at an angle. And then look how beautiful that's framed.
Yeah.
Everything is beautifully framed. Everything. There's no lazy, just throw something in. Everything is beautifully composed. Even from here, your eye flow goes up over here. You go
And
right
that's
through,
no small amount of text.
right, and right through here. Look how there's a path created by the backgrounds. Frame, 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 negative space, a nice triangle. So you have a nice triangle, which is almost like an arrow right to the sky. So you have this texture and then like bolder black on top. Another beautiful Ketchum with, again, another frame, great frame of characters. Look at those big, like goosey, sloppy shadows and all those little activation dots.
Yeah, but no, you just don't think of those shadows with Dennis the Menace. You just don't think of it. It's those kind of crazy silhouettes. It's beautiful.
And I think it relates completely to what Williamson was doing on Star Wars strips. I think that this sense of design and use of silhouette and cast shadow is exactly what you see going on here, even though Al is much more realistic. Look how you frame Chewbacca. Look how these great organic, whatever weird tree roots thing, beautiful, beautiful dry brush inking, lots of great texture. I mean, he was so good at all that. So good at
frame.
the design, right? And so I can see, again, I'm trying to point out, like, I can look at this and go, okay, I can see a lot of the same, even sort of similar mark making, even though the style is different. Look at that beautiful use of white space.
Yeah.
Look at that beautiful use of white space.
Yeah.
Right? So you have foreground and you have background, nothing in the middle ground. So you go pop, you go right there. Now, if he had rendered that all up, he would have slowed that down. And so you wouldn't get this great read the way you do.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, if I go like this, okay, frame, frame. Now, this is a foreground frame. I think you can either have foreground frames or background frames. This is a foreground frame, but that's also a background frame. And using the background, and Al was fantastic at doing these abstract shapes and that beautiful use of white space. And don't forget, now this is in the newspaper, and in the 80s, what? That size of that strip was maybe 4-5 inches if you were lucky in the newspaper, right? But look at framing, texture.
Yeah,
goes right back to that. Look at that scrumbly.
And Tony comments about that silhouette of Dennis the Menace. You can tell that Dennis and Joey are out playing late. Their moms are going to call them at any moment. It still feels like sunset. Yeah, for sure. James says chiaroscuro.
So I'm fortunate enough to actually own this page. But again, you see this beautiful use of black abstraction. Actually, look at that. You feel his arm swinging because of the use of that black. The beautiful use of the frame here relates completely all the way back. Mark Kelvin and Hobbes.
That's great.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Now, again, you would not think Al Williamson and Bill Watterson have anything in common. They, one guy's drawing a little boy and a make-believe, tiger, but those same ideas, those same concepts can be applied across styles.
Great.
And Al was fantastic with these abstract, sort of like vignettes is what I would call them. Like he makes these things a vignette. That's a vignette. So he really opens up the page by not having a border and leaving all this white space, right? He's amazing with that. Look at all that amazing white space, and he frames this. This is framed. A little bit of crack of white between the tires of the car. That's just like something you would see somebody like Hank Ketchum would use. So one of the things that was, since I started doing comic strips, and there's still a fair amount of Archie's writing here, but Al would drop, whenever possible, he would drop the border. And by dropping the border, it just opens it up.
Yeah.
It just opens up the whole thing, right? There's a frame here, you have to have it, but look how that just opens that all up in the beautiful abstract shapes.
Love that.
Beautiful abstract shapes. And again, a nice little bit of smoke. He's really just these weird but cool abstract shapes. And he's got all the texture and all the pattern and all this interesting texture and pattern. The texture. And here's another. I actually own this middle one here. Just again, beautiful sense of space. And if he had a panel border there, it would kind of stop it. So you actually sort of feel even more, because he eliminated it, that the guy is falling, But all these shapes of all these rocks, these beautiful lyrical shapes. Beautiful lyrical shapes. He was just fantastic with all that. Beautiful shapes. So, all of these artists to me all relate to each other in the fact that they all use those principles that I was talking about. He was just so good at using dropping.
Just enough in that panel, just enough material to indicate that they're in space somewhere. They're not just floating in a void.
Well, one thing you notice that Al does quite often is he does not draw anything on he leaves the ground open. Right? He leaves the ground open. So that kind of opens up the composition, right? He's not really drawn sometimes he is, if he's drawing like this guy running down an alley or something, right? But very often you notice that he will not. He has the background there. And again, these all, frame, foreground frame. Again, foreground frame here.
It's great.
Another great, great negative space. Beautiful texture, beautiful scrumbly ruin backgrounds, and he was so good at doing that. And then another guy I love was Gene Colan. And in fact, I was looking at a lot of Gene Colan recently because of what I was doing on the Phantom. And I don't know why I can't get this thing to move for some reason.
Well, that's wonderful, Mike. I think this is fantastic. I now want to have a whole episode where we just look at you just blow our minds with Mobius, or just pick an artist and just do a deep dive in something. I don't want to step on cartoonist kayfabe's toes. Let's not look at a specific book, but if you just want to pick an art, you want to pick an artist, really. I mean, there are some panels there that we've seen tonight that are just gorgeous, but we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. I had a few questions. Some of them were off topic and some were on topic, but I want to do. I was marking them along the way. If you're still in chat, you're still watching, I hope hope we're answering them. And if you're checking this on a replay, thanks again for the questions. So Tom had asked, we touched on this very briefly. How do you keep those straight ruled lines from going dead? I think it's a great question, because it's so easy for that, especially when you're working digitally. It'll feel like you're using 3D graph paper.
Okay, well, here, let me stop screen share. Okay, so get your triangle, put it on top of your, and you rule it. But you can rule it perfect, or you can kind of wiggle it just a little bit. Right, you can slightly wiggle it along. Let me see if I can.
But you think the line just can't be a dead weight line. It's got to have a bit of life to it. It's got to be a little bit of thick and thin.
Yeah, I'll show you here.
And if anyone else has any questions as we get close to wrapping up.
So I would take the point a little bit bigger. You should be able to see it. So I would rule it. So you don't have to make it perfect. You can just sort of slightly, here it's perfect.
So you're working on your Cintiq right now with a triangle?
With my orange triangle that I just showed you. And then I just sort of slightly move it, right?
Yep.
No, I can make it perfect if I want. So that's what I do if I'm working on the Cintiq. It's the same way if I was working on a sheet of paper.
That's
I mean, I can also, rule it by hand, right? So Al would do that. He would rule it by hand, right? He would rule it by hand. So again, if you draw something and you vary your line weight, right, that looks very organic. So that's how I would do it on the Cintiq. If I wanted to have a hand done feel, I use my triangle and I just rule it with, like I would do if I was on a traditional, pen and ink. And again, it all depends upon the feel that I want. Do I want it to be mechanical? Then I make it very precise. If I want it to be organic, I don't. I just slightly move my pen.
That's great. Well, I think we got one or two more questions. These are off topic, Mike, but I think let's get them in there. Just Wiley J Draws asks, and you do a lot of Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Is posting my comic a page per week? So I'm assuming this is a webcomic related question. On Instagram, a good idea, or is it giving away the milk? Is it giving away your story to publish your comic on Instagram versus some presumably waiting for it to be finished and then selling it or publishing it in some other fashion?
I think when you're a young artist, you give away your milk. You give it. You want to get everybody. I say this all the time. Put your work up. A lot of young artists are worried like somebody's going to steal my idea. Or, well, you know, you're going to be a farmer, right? There's no way you can say, well, I'm going to be a farmer, but I want to make sure that every, you know, potato gets in the hopper and nothing is wasted and no one's taking advantage of me and no gophers are going to eat anything. You at this point, you want people to love your work, collect your work. You want to set up your account so you can see who's downloading your image. And this goes back to, I remember having discussions with Alberto Ruiz, who we had on the show, way back in the early 2000s, in the early version of the internet. And Alberto's idea was that, you know, he was doing all these amazing drawings and just putting them up, and people were like losing their mind and downloading. They became fans. They became collectors. That's what you want to do. How else are you going to get people to even know who you are to want to spend money on your comic?
I totally agree. I totally agree. There's a cartoonist I met at a convention. I did back-to-back conventions the last 2 weeks on the weekends, and a cartoonist, a very young cartoonist, came up, was asking, wanted to share like little snippets of their work, and they were afraid to put it online. They were afraid to put it on Webtoons or put it on Instagram for fear that someone would steal it. And their idea was very precious, and they described their idea to me, and they said it's a combination of this IP and this IP and this IP. They're saying, here are the things I stole to make the thing I don't want anybody to steal. It's like, you know, just got to get it out there. You just got to get out there. And then when it's collected, then you go to the copyright office and get file your copyright.
First of all, you have to also realize that the reason why you collect stuff very often with this generation and even the sort of the previous generation is because they put their stuff up for free on the internet. You are putting your stuff up for free on the internet. Yeah. Astounding Space Thrills.
Yeah. No one knows who. No. People still don't know who I am. MiddleAgeComic.com. It's free. Of course, it's free. Also, I think it's just a nice thing to do. I feel, you know, I don't want anyone ever have to, you know, putting it up there is great. Giving away the milk is fine because you can always package it again later. You know, my comic's free to read online, or you can get the book as well. You can get it from Amazon. You can get it on your Kindle. Exactly. You know, it's not, you know, but just get it out there and get the feedback and feed off of that.
You need to generate hundreds of pages. You need to read hundreds of strips. If you're going to go from being a hobbyist, which is you sit down on, you know, Friday or Saturday and you draw your 1 or 2 strips for the week. Okay. But if you want to be doing this as a living, you have to produce enough volume of work and have enough volume of work out there to snag the eyeballs so that you can get to the other side. I mean, that's the only, I don't see any other way. The idea like, well, I'm going to wait and, you know, I'm going to make my book. And very often that doesn't happen.
Right.
It doesn't happen, you know, make it, put it out there.
Well, we have one more question that's been queued up. Catalina Mello asks, off topic. And this is our last off-topic question, folks. And please, I hope we were able to get to as many people as we could. But we're over time. But this has been great, Mike. Thank you so much. I loved it. I love this. Ask if you've had clients who said this is too cartoony or this body is too stylized. What would you tell them? So if they've hired you, Mike, and they didn't realize how you drew, or you delivered something and it was more cartoony than they might like, or in a different style than they might like, what would you do? Or what would you say to them?
Well, I think in the case, if I had a client who hired me and they weren't familiar with my work, maybe, I don't know. You turn it in and they go, well, this is too cartoony. Then you have a conversation with them, because a lot of times lay people don't use the proper terminology, right? It may not be too cartoony. It might be too simple. Not detailed enough. right? But to them would be like, I think cartoony, I think Charles Schultz, right? I don't think that John Romita is cartoony. Right. But some people would go, that's cartoony.
Sure. Jack Kirby, cartoony.
Right. Yeah. So my advice is to have a more in-depth conversation with them to basically suss out what it is that they want and what it is that they don't like, so that you can agree, you can come to some understanding of terminology, because sometimes people will say contradictory things because they don't have the language to express what they really mean.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, as my work's often accused of being cartoony. It's very cartoony. I lean into it, but yeah, but that's a great. Actually, we got one more question coming in under the wire, off topic. But thank you for the question, Catalina. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing everyone's name correctly. Patrick Lugo, who I know from almost 30 years ago, maybe more than 30 years ago, and back in college. Patrick, good to see you. Asks, what's the old school skill set, airbrushing, photo developing, etc., which you still use with modern tech?
Well, it's probably my line. My ink line is probably the thing that really completely, my sense of color.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
You know, because there's some things that are just not applicable, as I've described before. So I was showing you making the lines tonight. The thing is that when I use a pen, a certain kind of pen gives me a certain kind of line, gives me a certain kind of flexibility automatically, that I have to build or craft when I ink digitally, because piece of glass, it's not a 108. It's not a Gillette 291. It's not a 303. It's not a Hunt 102 on a piece of hot press or a piece of cold press. It's all just the same smooth thing. So
sure.
When I want to do a more illustrated line as opposed to a cartoony, typical thin, thick line, I have to sort of build it. I have to sort of craft it in a way that I don't have to if I work traditionally. Like, I know if I'm making with a brush traditionally, I know when the brush starting to lose ink and would be good with dry brush, but I actually have to get a brush that's a dry brush to make dry brush. So it's not actually dry brush. It's it's like a chalk pen or something that gives me that sort of thing. So it's like, it's a completely non-organic manufactured way of doing the same.
Yeah, an approximation of what you would do traditionally. Yeah.
And it's sort of like a hunt and peck kind of thing, because like, well, does this thing that says it's this, oh, well, that doesn't actually look like a dry brush. The chalk looks more like a dry brush than the dry brush says is dry brush,
Sure. Well, that was awesome. Oh yeah, and James just says the panels you were showing reminds me of the chiaroscuro technique, a skill I don't have yet. LOL. But we all will. But thank you all for being here.
Yes.
I'm gonna rewatch this episode, Mike. I want to see. I want to watch you walk through those pieces again, because I thought that was fantastic. But thank you all for being here. If you're on YouTube, again, please hit the subscribe button. We want to have 1,000 subscribers by the time Jamar comes back.
Share this with your friends. Share this with
please.
Your friends.
Yeah. And you can find Mike on Instagram at instagram.com/drawmanly. And you can find my webcomic, The Middle Age, at middleagecomic.com. Is there anything else you want to say, Mike, before we call it a night?
No, I mean, you can read both Judge Parker and the Phantom Daily on Comics Kingdom. You can also see a lot of the same material that I post also on my Facebook at Mike Manley on Facebook. So
yeah, and you can see everything Mike was talking tonight. You can see him apply that in the Phantom and Judge Parker. It's really cool to see all those pieces and how they get it filtered through Mike into his work. It's great. All right, everybody, let's call it there. We have to do this. We're still in the pandemic.
yes.
And as Jamar would ask, we are going to do this, and you can join in at home. We can't see you, or can we? We're still in the pandemic. Remember to wash those Kirby hands.
Kirby hands. See you next week.
Thanks so much.